Hi, I'm Abby,
And I'm Selena.
and we're presenting on South Korean-North Korean relations.
So along with this presentation, we wrote a 20-page long policy research paper, and that is available at the front desk for you to pick up. And that sort of goes more into depth into what we're going to talk about today and outlines some policy proposals in terms of going forward with North Korea and South Korea. So we first wanted to give you a brief overview of the Korean Peninsula. So 1945 was a landmark year in that it marked the end of World War II. But in terms of the Korean Peninsula, it also marked the deciding of the 38th parallel line, marking the difference between North Korea and South Korea. And this was decided in August at the Potsdam Conference. However, because the 38th parallel was marked along a lot of communities, there were a lot of skirmishes. And then by 1948, by 1950, tensions escalated and it became a full-out war. North Korea was backed by the Soviet Union and by China, and the leader, Kim Il-sung, was communist. And South Korea was backed by the US and led by Syngman Rhee. And these two sort of ideologies marked a proxy war in the greater Cold War, the ideological war between communism and capitalism. By 1953, the Korean War had concluded, and the 1953 Korean Armistice Agreement was signed. However, this created a temporary peace, not a formal peace treaty. And so today, the Korean Peninsula remains a war zone. During the Korean War, North Korea began to realize that it must rely on itself to defend the country. Because of factors like the Cuban Missile Crisis, the ongoing Cultural Revolution in China, as well as the Sino-Soviet split, North Korea decided to develop its nuclear program. As of today, it has 90 warheads, as well as 50 deployable warheads, as well as 20 to 30 kilograms of fissile material.
North Korea's nuclear program began in 1959 with a Soviet-North Korean treaty that established trade agreements between the two nations and gave the DPRK, or North Korea, a modified Soviet IRT-2000 reactor. This reactor became functional in 1963, and following international pressure for 2 decades as other countries became aware of their nuclear capabilities, North Korea agreed to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, in 1985. So the image on screen is of American satellite imagery from 1965 that showed the Soviet IRT reactor when it was first being built. But in 1989, another American satellite showed another facility, one for reprocessing uranium, under construction at Yongbyon, which is this site of the reactor. This information the US revealed to the international community, and it caused outrage, which eventually forced the DPRK into signing on to the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, safeguard agreements. By signing onto the safeguard agreements, North Korea allowed inspectors into their facilities. And these inspectors quickly realized that Pyongyang's claims of possessing less than 100 milligrams of plutonium were wildly untrue. For reference, a first-generation atomic bomb required about 8 kilograms of uranium or plutonium to do any damage. After withdrawing from the NPT in 1993, North Korea unloaded an estimated 20 to 30 kilograms of plutonium from the Yongbyon reactor, causing the 1994 nuclear crisis. So some details about the North Korean reactor. So it was, unlike most reactors at the time, it was gas-cooled and graphite moderated. So in these types of reactors, the graphite blocks, the graphite moderators are used to hold the fuel rods, and between the graphite blocks, there are channels for the coolant to flow through, the coolant in this case being CO2. So the fuel rods are made of natural uranium, where water-cooled reactors require slightly enriched uranium. So this makes gas-cooled, or magnox as they're called, reactors easier to run with less infrastructure. The core is cooled with carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide that is heated up by the nuclear reactions is pushed into a heat exchanger, which generates steam that produces power. And this is done through steam turbine equipment that is pretty much consistent through all nuclear reactors. This is how nuclear power is harnessed. These Magnox reactors are typically safer than water-cooled reactors as they avoid a void flow, which is when voids or steam bubbles form in the coolant. And because this coolant itself is a gas, voids don't really form, which reduces the reactivity of the core. However, this core is open on one end, which allows for fuel rod removal while the reactor is still running, making producing weapons-grade plutonium much more efficient, which is especially convenient if you're trying to build up a large nuclear weapons arsenal. Okay, so the nuclear crises of 1994, when Pyongyang unloaded 20 to 30 kilograms of uranium following their withdrawal from the NPT, it nearly caused military conflict between the United States and North Korea. However, it was resolved in late 1994 when Washington traded 2 light water reactors in return for North Korea's signing of the Geneva Agreed Framework. In 1998, Pyongyang launched a long-range ballistic missile over Japan, which caused another international crisis, which was resolved through the Perry process, and the nations came very, very close to peace. In 2002, however, following President Bush's speech, which declared North Korea, Iran, and Iraq the axis of evil, Pyongyang once again pulled out of the NPT, revealed its highly enriched uranium program, and restarted the Yongbyon reactor.
So that was a lot on the physics and the current nuclear reactors in North Korea. But what was happening with diplomacy? So sort of jumping from 2000 to 2010, in the early 2010s, inter-Korean diplomacy was rocky, to say the least. In 2010, a stray North Korean torpedo hit a South Korean Navy ship, splitting in half and killing 46 people. As a result of this crisis, inter-Korean diplomacy deteriorated up until 2017, when President Moon became president of Korea. And this image depicts Moon and Kim Jong-un holding hands at the 2018 Inter-Korean Conference. This summit was the first inter-Korean summit since the 2007 one and marked a new era of inter-Korean diplomacy. However, that has also shifted in the past 5 years. President Moon focused on reducing nuclear alliance, had a no nuclear weapons policy, and focused on these inter-Korean summits with Kim. He hoped to forge a better bilateral relationship with North Korea. However, President Yoon took the stage in 2022. He argued for deterrence, security conferences with Japan, and argued also for the dismantlement of northern nuclear programs. This hardline stance changed the trajectory of North and South Korean relations. Additionally, President Yoon was just impeached in December of last year. As of now, he is still awaiting a trial, and it is unsure whether he will continue to be president or whether he will be followed by another successor. Because of these variables, it's still undecided as to whether South Korea will continue on a path of deterrence or whether it will go back to the Sunshine Policy and President Moon's reduction of nuclear reliance. Another unknown factor is Trump's nuclear policy. As the earlier keynote speaker mentioned, the expiration of the New START Treaty, which hugely curbed Russian nuclear expansion, expires in February of 2026. With this incoming, we have to look at Trump's first term and his nuclear policy, as well as what he might do in his second term. Well, Trump withdrew from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. He also placed limitations on the Korea-US Free Trade Agreement, straining relationships between the two countries. Now he plans for arms control and nuclear concessions on China and Russia. So as we proceed into the next 3 years of his term, we have to look at whether he will be a negotiator, a bringer of peace, or whether he will just continue on a path of destroying South Korean and US relations.
So for our policy proposals, we're proposing a United States softline approach as well as youth engagement. So historically, the United States has played an important role in shaping relations on the Korean Peninsula, especially after the USSR fell and China pulled away from North Korea diplomatically. In 1998, with the missile crisis, the Clinton administration responded by sending William Perry, the former Secretary of Defense, to review US policy towards North Korea, who encouraged the talks with Pyongyang that led to progress on the dismantling of Pyongyang's ballistic missile program. Of course, the United States must also include South Korea in any possible diplomatic exchanges, but by pulling Pyongyang out of its isolationism and establishing a united softline approach from the United States and South Korea, a possibility for peace may emerge.
You know, and as we've seen with other youth activists over the past decade, Malala and Greta Thunberg, we can see that youth have the possibility and can enact change. Through cross-cultural engagement and youth engagement, informing youth on topics such as non-proliferation, how nuclear reactors work, and what we can do to herald in an era of peace, it is all the more important to focus on the next generation, fostering a generation of leaders who can bring peace to our world. Dr. Potter today mentioned that we are in a world of disarray, and I believe that to be fully true. But with initiatives like youth engagement, by connecting with people from India, Pakistan, Japan, and more, it is possible to bring peace into the next few decades. We hope that by understanding Korean relations, understanding other global issues as well, that we can foster in and herald in a new era of global diplomacy and prosperity. Thank you so much. So just a quick reminder, we do have a paper we worked on as well. So feel free to pick a copy of that at the front desk and read through all of it. Thank you so much.